Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about how to play Protection Paladin in patch 10.0, the Dragonflight Pre-patch. Protection Paladin is a tank that has really good group utility and excels in dungeons. They are generally decent raid tanks, but they have some difficulty living through big boss hits, and that has historically been their big weakness, at least in the modern state of the game. It's a tank that has a lot of power, but it can be a little unforgiving in really difficult content. Conceptually, it's a pretty cool class. It has a lot of single target damage, it has good self-healing and self-shielding tools, it has strong defensive cooldowns, it has excellent group utility, and some stuff like spell warding is totally unique, not provided by any other spec in the game, which is great. The class has gone through a pretty significant set of changes in 10.0, and resource generation is down quite a lot, but the class has gained new cooldowns, gained more passive defenses, and in general, I think it's actually come through the patch in really good shape. Now let's jump into the important stuff. At its core, Paladin is the same class it's been for the last 8 or 10 years or so. You use holy power generators to do damage, lots of it, and generate holy power, obviously. You spend the holy power on Shield of the Righteous for the big armor bonus it provides and the damage it does. You heal yourself with Word of Glory occasionally, and you use your cooldowns to do enormous bursts of damage whenever Wings is available. Avenger's Shield is a really awesome ranged silence that you can use to absolutely destroy caster mobs in Mythic Plus. Prot Pally's pretty good, pretty fun. Prot Pally has been reworked in 10.0 in several ways. Avenger's Shield no longer generates holy power. Instead, there are like 5 different talents that increase its damage. One that causes you to shield for 50% of the damage it deals. A couple that increase your damage mitigation after you use it. These all make it so that Avenger's Shield is still a good, important rotational skill to use, but no longer your number 1 priority. Instead, it's like a really good, kind of upper mid-level filler skill. Because of that, you want to use your resource generators, which are Judgment and Blessed Hammer, and get the value out of those first, so that you can maintain your active mitigation, Shield of the Righteous. Then fill in the gaps with Avenger's Shield while those stronger skills are cooling down. In practice, this doesn't actually feel that different from how it used to play. The priority and the mentality are different, and that is the big adjustment, but the end result is that you are tanky and you do damage, and now you have more cooldowns available as well, so everything's great. Paladin was one of the tanks I had the lowest expectations for coming into Dragonflight, because the idea to remove holy power from Avenger's Shield, which they rolled out very early on in testing, just seemed like such a terrible decision to me. But I have to say it's working out a lot better than I had feared. I don't love it, but I like pretty much everything else that Blizzard has done with Prot Paladin, and that makes me really hopeful that the class is going to work out very well. Yeah, what a shocker, Prot Pally, it's still good. And before I forget, Paladin has a combat res now. It costs 3 holy power, which is too expensive, but it is a useful piece of group utility, which is nice to have. It's weird to me that they gave this to Paladin instead of any other healer or tank. I guess not warrior, shouting people back to life seems pretty stupid, but priest would have made sense. Paladin already has such a hilarious amount of group utility that giving them more doesn't really make sense to me. People aren't upset about it because having more combat resing classes is good, but it's a strange choice to give it to Paladin. Alright, now for the real meat and potatoes here. How strong is Prot Pally in 10.0? I think it's pretty good. It still has really strong cooldowns, definitely quite a lot stronger than it did during Shadowlands. It lost a lot of holy power generation, but it generated way more than it needed or could realistically use, so it's not as bad of a nerf as it seems at first glance. Obviously, things will be different in Dragonflight, but right now, Paladins are still way over the amount of Shield of or Holy Pally generation required to maintain 100% Shield of the Righteous uptime. Very easy to do. Beyond that, Paladin makes up for the nerf by having a bunch of defensive layers other than Shield of the Righteous, which they didn't used to have, and the ability to customize your talent tree and spec into more shielding, or more self-healing, or more block chance, or parry chance, or whatever you need to address what you're tanking is good. I think Paladin will probably still be capable of pushing Mythic Plus and Dragonflight very well. Paladin isn't the strongest tank, that's Prot Warrior at least for now, but it has a lot of diversity in the way that it constructs its defensive toolkit, and that is really important for tanking different kinds of content. It also still has fantastic offensive and defensive cooldowns. You can Ardent Defender and have a built-in active cheat death. You can pop wings and obliterate mobs with Hammer of Wrath and Judgment. Now let's dive in game, take a look at the talent tree, go through the key talents, and point out all the important stuff. Alright, I'm logged in, and here we are looking at the talent tree. Let's just go ahead and start with the first of my 3 builds. I mean, technically I made it second, but this is the raid build, and then I have 2 different Mythic Plus builds depending on what Covenant you are playing. For the raid build, you have some options, and I would say, just to give sort of a general overview of the tree, you have some pretty hard fixed options that you, or non-options that you have no choice but to take, like Avenging Wrath and Rebuke. I can't ever justify not taking those talents. The problem I really have with this tree, if I had to narrow it down into anything, is that you have this incredible density of talents right in this area, sort of like lower midsection. Like, basically this talent is like built like a fat guy. Oh my god, it's just like me, for real, for real. Yeah. So anyways, starting up at the top, you get Lay on Hands by default, just for free, and you also get Concentration and Devotion Aura for free. This is, I think, the only tank, well, certainly the only tank, I think the only class that I'm aware of that gets not 1 but 2 points for free, and that is pretty nice. You can skip Blessing of Freedom. I don't think that there's enough good stuff up in the higher parts of the tree to justify it, though. And you would never want to skip Hammer of Wrath. It's a great damage dealing skill. It's a great resource generator. You can skip Auras of Swift Vengeance. It really just boils down to, in a raid, whether you're going to be the one providing your raid group with Devotion Aura or not. And Crusader Aura is worthless in raids. As you can see, I have it turned on. That's sort of the thing, right? You always leave Crusader Aura on until somebody tells you that you've forgotten. You could run Retribution Aura. I mean, getting wings whenever anybody dies, or getting Seraphim whenever anybody gets, you know, trucked, is pretty nice. Not a huge value add. Definitely, if you have multiple Pallies in your raid, you probably aren't going to be the one running Red Aura, but, you know, whatever. You work that out together. Over here you have Repentance or Blinding Light. I'm always going to take Blinding Light, but I'm not usually going to in raids because I just don't need that utility of a CC. Divine Steed, this is pretty non-negotiable. You have to have it. Fist of Justice you have to get over here to get Greater Judgment and Rebuke. Greater Judgment is basically 20% more damage on most of your Shield of the Righteous casts. Shield of the Righteous is like 15% of your overall damage or so most of the time, so that's a pretty nice little bump, especially considering you have to take it anyway to get Interrupt, and you're not playing a tank without the Interrupt. That would be foolish. Getting 2 charges of Divine Steed is nice. Getting some pathing over here is good. Cleanse Toxins is pretty nice utility to have in a dungeon group and just sort of out in the world. I don't really think it's worth the point in raid, just because you don't really run into that many poison and disease dispels. It's usually just magic, and if you do, you've almost certainly got a bunch of healers who can take care of it instead. Seasoned Warhorse, it's pretty basic. It adds 1 second to Divine Steed. Right now, it stacks with the conduit named Lights Barding, I believe. I'm sure it's around here somewhere. Oh, not in this build. Here we go, Lights Barding. So this is like one of the very few talents and conduits that overlap with each other, Lights Barding. As you can see, right now I have 4 second uptime. If I swap to Lights Barding, it goes up to 8.4 seconds. Pretty insane. And I have tested it. I don't want to sit here and cast back and forth just to prove it, but basically if you were to toggle this off and you have the 278 Lightspartan conduit, I'll do it just to demonstrate. All right, so that conduit value isn't showing correctly, but basically 8.4 seconds, swap this talent off, and it's going to go down to 6.2, I believe. 6.3. Well, rounding error on my part. Either way, great talent. Extra uptime on your, your one mobility skill is real nice. Avenging Wrath, this is your main offensive cooldown. Of course, you're going to take it. You need it for pathing down the tree anyway. Holy Aegis isn't a great point, but as you can see, when I take 1 point out, I need a point somewhere to get down. I mean, technically I need 2 points to get down the tree, and what am I going to do? I'm going to take, basically only have a handful of other options. You can take a minute off of Blessing of Protection, which is potentially good if you need it for a mechanic, or potentially worthless if you don't need it for a mechanic. Turn Evil almost never has value. It's very rare that you're going to be in a situation where you need to make enemies run in fear, and certainly like Undead, Aberration, and Demons are not that common. So 2% armor and crit is just an okay dump of points here. Golden Path and Judgment of Light, they both add a pretty small trickle of healing. I really don't think they're very valuable points. Seal of Mercy just makes Golden Path do more healing, and it costs 2 points. Like, this is really overpriced. After Image gives you a bit of like splash healing whenever you Word of Glory. This is just very much like a Holy Paladin talent. Not really great. Blessing of Sacrifice is excellent group utility. It's a wonderful talent. Everybody should be using this as much as they can, really. Your option here is you can either cut a minute off the cooldown, which is nice, or you can turn it into a pretty nice offensive cooldown for yourself. I think the vast majority of Paladins are going to be running Recompense because of that ability to get some offensive value out of using a defensive cooldown. And then, of course, Unbreakable Spirit. This is one of my favorite talents. Just cuts a bunch of your cooldowns. Divine Shield, Hardened Defender, Lay on Hands, cuts them down by 30%, and that's very cheap to pick up. You kind of need it for technically you don't need it for pathing, but not every build's going to go through Recompense or improve Blessing of Protection, and in that case, this always amazing talent is great for pathing. Seal of Reprisal, 10% more damage for Shield of the Righteous. It's good, 2 points is not great. Excuse me. 2 points for this is not great, but considering the options are like this crappy little trickle of healing or this worse trickle of healing, it's not bad. And the same goes over here with Incandescence. It just sort of gives you a chance to trigger some extra damage from time to time. It's not a lot, but it does seem like it's quite a bit more than Touch of Light. And, a little bit of damage is better than no damage. Speaking of a very little bit of damage, Hallowed Ground, 10% Consecration damage. Consecration is usually like 3 to 4% of your total damage, so this is a really, really, really poor point. Like, if this doubled your Consecration damage, that would be about what it needs to be for a point that is this deep in the tree, cost-wise. It's undertuned by like 9,000% where it is right now. Divine Purpose is great. It gives you a ton of extra Shield of the Righteous casts. Technically speaking, it gives you about 15% more Shield of the Righteous casts, but that adds up very quickly. Holy Avenger, by comparison, is a weird burst holy power generation ability. Having more holy power is something that you really want to space out so that you're more tanky all the time. Having big bursts of tankiness doesn't usually do you a lot of good, especially in the way that Holy Avenger is constructed, so there's basically zero reason to ever use this. Seal of Might is sort of like it's a good talent, especially right now. You can have pretty high uptime on Avenging Wrath, well over 35% uptime on Avenging Wrath, potentially over 50. Because of that, 8% mastery during that period where you're going to be layering other cooldowns in as well is really good. Seal of Alacrity, just sort of a base 4% haste, isn't great, but the problem is, look at what the options are. Obduracy, 2% speed and avoidance, and then a pretty low proc chance to get 3% more damage dealt to the target. Like, that's not great. And it's not like there's a lot of talent options to, like, take out. You can't take anything above this line out to get down any further. So if you're coming all the way down here, you can only get to 1 point of Seal of the Crusader. Or you could take Hallowed Ground for that awesome 0.3% damage increase. And then similarly over here, Aspiration of Divinity, you could get 2% more strength, tacked onto like your weakest offensive skill. And that's about it. If you had spec'd into Afterimage, this like Holy Paladin talent, you could come over here and get this Seal of Clarity, give yourself like a 5 or I guess 10% chance when you spend Holy Power to reduce your Holy Power cost. It's just very undertuned. So these just passive stat things are much better. And then here in the bottom you have Seraphim, which is sort of a raid talent. I opted not to go with it just because I think it is very like parse oriented, which is fine. Like there's nothing wrong with going for a parse, especially in raid when it's, you know, relatively easier content. But I think for the majority of people, Sanctified Wrath is going to be the better option. It just makes your Avenging Wrath last 25 seconds instead of the base of 20. And it causes Judgment to generate an extra Holy Power while Avenging Wrath is up, which really helps with maintaining your Shield of the Righteous. This middle path is like an absolute must-have, no matter what you're doing right now, whether it's Mythic Plus or Raid or even just leveling. This is definitely the route you're going to want to go down. I'll quickly point out the capstone talents on the other two sides, just kind of to demonstrate how weak they are by comparison. So, Of Dusk and Dawn creates this sort of resonance where you want to ping-pong back and forth between hitting 5 Holy Power and then burning it out, generating 1 more, burning all that out, and hitting 0. And then repeat. It's a pretty annoying playstyle, and the reward is 6% more damage and 4% damage reduction. This is pretty bad. This is like a very annoying playstyle for a really minor reward. Like if they doubled these values to like 12 and 8% respectively, I think I could be on board with playing for this or going for this and tolerating this irritating playstyle. But given how weak this is, I can't imagine anyone is ever going to play this seriously. I think that the only people who would wind up playing this are people who don't know any better or people who are like trolling. And that would pretty much be it. As you can see, there's like this tiny little 10% more damage and 10% more cooldown reduction on like Judgment aspect added onto it, which is even weaker than this talent. And, you know, you're doubling down on a pretty weak talent to get something that's even weaker. Not great. The way that I think you're going to want to spec in Dragonflight is basically to go right down this little path here, because 2% speed and avoidance isn't great, but it's not bad. I do think it's better than, like, whatever this is, less than 0.5% of damage. 6% extra holy damage to your enemies is fine. The proc uptime isn't, like, amazing, if I remember correctly, but it's fine. This is really quite good. Zealot's Paragon, this is the same bonus as the legendary badge of the Mad Paragon, which gives you, or a very similar bonus, which gave you 30% more Hammer of Wrath damage, and then whenever you hit with Hammer of Wrath, it would extend the duration of Avenging Wrath by 1 second. This tooltip is obviously bugged, and it now applies to Hammer of Wrath and Judgment, which is actually quite a significant upgrade. So getting down here and getting Zealot's Paragon is going to be really nice, definitely something to look forward to in Dragonflight. Now let's move over to the spec tree, and I'll just start by saying that this top 6 set of talents is all absolute must-haves. You do have 2 choice nodes right here in the second row, Blessed Hammer, which is great, and Hammer of the Righteous, which is not. There's really no reason for this choice to be a choice. Hammer of the Righteous is just strictly worse in basically every scenario. It's not like Hammer of the Righteous is awesome physical damage that it does in single target makes up for the fact that it has fewer charges, or yeah, I mean, Blessed Hammer's just always better. Redoubt versus Inner Light right now is a pretty simple choice. Right now, Shield of the Righteous, if you're reasonably well geared, or even decently geared, and you're making good use of your talents like Bastion of Light, and you're using Divine Purpose effectively and so on, Shield of the Righteous is never going to fall off. Inner Light requires Shield of the Righteous to fall off for it to do anything, and it doesn't really do a ton, even so. It's probably a good skill or a good talent to take while you're leveling and your holy power generation is really kind of bad, but I certainly wouldn't be using this once I was past like level 30 or whatever, maybe 20 maybe. I would be running Redoubt and just having an extra 6% strength and stamina, because this is going to be fully stacked all the time once you have any sort of decent amount of holy power generation going. Holy Shield is great. It lets you block spells. It increases your base block chance by 20% as well, which is nice. One quick note, they have reworked the way that Holy Shield and spell blocking works in general. Now, as a Holy Paladin, as a Prod Paladin, you are not capable of blocking spell damage over time. So any sort of effects, like if there was, if instead of my consecration being my consecration, it was like a fiery zone on the ground, if I walked into it in the past, I would have been able to spell block that. It would have shown up in the combat log as like you absorbed whatever your block value was of that damage, essentially. Now it will just do full damage all the time, except they have reworked the mastery. As you can see here, it says, while inside your consecration, your damage taken is reduced by 12.6%. That was already there. And you have a chance equal to your block chance, very awkward wording, to reduce your damage taken from harmful periodic effects. So that more or less replaces the way that Holy Shield used to work, where it would absorb damage over time effects and ground effects and that sort of thing. But to actually block spells, it has to be like, you get hit with a Frostbolt, you can block the Frostbolt, but if you were to get hit by, say, a Pyroblast, you could block the initial hit, but the dot would tick on you regular style, unless you're standing in a Consecrate. Grand Crusader is pretty basic and pretty important. It gives you a chance to reset your Avenger Shield either when you avoid a melee attack, which is a dodge or a parry, or use Blessed Hammer. Shining Light has been buffed. It had been nerfed down to every 5 Shield of the Righteous casts would make your next Word of Glory free, and that has been changed to every 3, which is really nice. Next we have Inspiring Vanguard. This just bumps the chance for Grand Crusader to proc up from 15 to 20%, and it also gives you a 2% strength buff whenever it procs. 2% strength isn't like great, but in conjunction, the two sides of this talent make it decent. It's not mandatory, like you can definitely take this out if you need to path to something else deeper in the tree, but it's not bad. The same goes with Barricade of Faith over here. Like, I would recommend taking out Barricade of Faith first most of the time, especially in raid. If you're going to path into something like Tears Enforcer that requires 2 points, I would probably drop, let's say, Barricade of Faith or Inspiring Vanguard. First one and then the other. And then, of course, Ardent Defender. This is a critical defensive cooldown. This is kind of one of your main trio of defensive cooldowns, which would be Ardent Defender, Guardian of Ancient Kings, and Eye of Tyr, which is back from Legion. Bulwark of Order is the Avenger Shield talent. It has been nerfed. It was a 100% of your Avenger Shield damage absorbs blah 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 talent in Shadowlands, and now it's only 50%. That's fine. There's a lot of talents that buff Avenger Shield's damage, and obviously you have talents like Barricade of Faith that buff its defenses in other ways, its defensive value in other ways, so it's alright. This little choice note here, you have a choice between Improved Ardent Defender and Blessing of Spell Warding. Both of these can be good. I think that Improved Ardent Defender usually is like pretty unnecessary. There's too many other really good talents in the tree to justify tacking a little bit more damage reduction into a defensive cooldown that's already very strong. Blessing of Spell Warding, on the other hand, is really nice, and they've made it so that instead of replacing Blessing of Protection, it now shares a cooldown, which means that you're not giving up Blessing of Protection if you take Blessing of Spell Warding. You actually just get to have the choice of one of the two on a 5-minute cooldown. That's great, but this isn't necessarily a must-have in Raid, so I didn't put it into the build, by default. I would say if you were going to pick it up, I would drop Barricade of Faith for Raid to get Blessing of Spell Warding. And yeah, it's pretty nice. And it synergizes nicely with this improved Blessing of Protection and Spell Warding over here. Relentless Inquisitor is not really a great talent. It's basically just 3% haste. It's very easy to hit the maximum number of stacks and then just stay there forever. Not really a great talent, but, good for very cheap pathing deeper in the tree, and so I'm running it in the Raid talent setup, but I wouldn't run it in normal ones. Or Mythic Plus ones, I mean. Light of the Titans is a pretty basic healing increase. It doesn't really add a ton of value. It's really mostly just for pathing deeper into the tree. Strength of Conviction is a 20% damage and healing increase. Basically, you're pretty much always going to be in Consecration, and this just increases your healing, and then 20% more damage on Shield of the Righteous, which is around maybe 3% more damage. That's pretty good for 1 point. It's not very good for 2 points, but you do have to path deeper into the tree. And this talent is an option, or Hand of the Protector, which in raids, I would say I never try to heal anybody who's in the raid other than myself. So this is basically a dead point. So your option is either like a pretty decent 2-pointer or a single dead point. I think usually I'd rather have both of those points actually doing something. This is one of my favorite choice nodes, and unfortunately it's broken. Avenging Wrath Might makes your Avenging Wrath grant you 20% crit chance on top of all the other effects. That's all it seems to do, but 20% crit chance when you're already doing 20%, let me just take a look here, 20% more damage, 20% more healing, you're getting extra holy power, you're getting 2 Hammer of Wrath for free, or outside of the execute window. That's pretty nice to have 20% more crit on top of that. Sentinel is a pretty complicated, not really that complicated, but pretty interesting new defensive cooldown. It replaces Avenging Wrath. It basically functions just like Avenging Wrath, except it makes it so that you gain 15 stacks of Divine Resolve. These increase your max health and reduce your damage taken by 2% per stack. It has a max duration of 25 seconds, although that does get extended by Zealot's Paragon and Mad Paragon, the Shadowlands legendary, so that usually you're only able to get like 5 more Hammers of Wrath in, so that's like an extra 5 seconds on top of the 25, about 30 seconds of max uptime, maybe 31. You will eventually start to lose stacks, but if you're able to Shield of the Righteous fast enough, you can prevent the stack decay from occurring, or at least slow it down. Basically what this means is you get 30% damage reduction and 30% more max life on a 2-minute cooldown, and it has about 30 seconds of uptime. The problem with this talent, the massive horrible problem with this talent, is this excellent talent down here, which gives you cooldown reduction whenever you spend holy power. Right now you are able to generate and spend enough holy power that you can cut like 45 seconds to a minute off the cooldown of Avenging Wrath. So it's like a 1 minute, 15, 20 second cooldown. It doesn't work with Sentinel at all. I'm pretty confident that this is a bug, and I'm very hopeful that this will be fixed for Dragonflight, and maybe even just later this week, or maybe the beginning of next week. But right now, this means that this is a 2-minute cooldown, and this is a minute to minute 20 cooldown. You gotta go with the shorter cooldown in that case, because this is an offensive cooldown, ultimately. We've already talked about Hand of the Protector. I haven't really talked about these talents over here, so let me just go over them very quickly. 10% cooldown reduction of Lay on Hands is 1 minute off the cooldown. That's pretty bad. 15% consecration size and slow and whatever is okay in Mythic Plus. It is nice for if you have to move around a little bit. Like, I'll just demonstrate the relative sizes of these. You can see, not that big. All right, and thankfully it's not going to fall off before I get the new one. All right, now let's compare. Ah, quite a bit bigger. Just pop out a couple of these here. See, it's still there. I won't move this time just to demonstrate. Just wait until it expires. Yeah, you know, it gives you about this much more range to move around freely in your consecration. More importantly, it gives you sort of a permanent AoE slow on all the enemies that you're tanking, which if they're slowable means you can pretty easily kite them, which is nice in Mythic Plus. In Raid, pretty worthless. Over here you have the choice node of Improved Holy Shield and Sanctuary. 5% damage reduction is pretty incredible, and the fact that it applies to everything, physical damage taken, spell damage, dots, whatever, is great. Like, I would prefer this one 100% of the time. The one little thing that's a bit interesting is, as you can see, Improved Holy Shield gives you 10% chance to block spells, not attacks. And so that does, as far as I understand, work with the spell block chance component of your mastery in reducing your damage taken from harmful periodic spell effects. So that's something, but I think for the vast majority of cases, you're going to rather have Sanctuary than Improved Holy Shield. And neither of these talents really is that great unless you're in Mythic Plus and you're taking Consecrated Ground already. Having to spend 2 points to get over here to get 5% damage reduction is a little eh. Tears Enforcer is a pretty minor AoE damage proc. In large-scale AoE, this adds up to quite a bit of damage pretty quickly. Like, I think you can get about maybe 10% of your total damage out of Tears Enforcer in Mythic Plus, which is pretty good. In single target or, you know, smaller scale raid settings, it's not very good. And Resolute Defender, this is a talent I've seen some people liking quite a bit. I don't think it's very good. Every Shield of the Righteous gives you a second off of Ardent Defender and Divine Shield. Well, I think if you're really juicing it as hard as you can maybe get 20 Shield of the Righteous casts off a minute. That's one every 3 seconds. So we're talking about, you know, right now Ardent Defender is a minute 25 second cooldown. So we're talking about shaving it down to maybe a minute cooldown. I don't think that's very good. I think that's really, really bad. Doesn't really make sense to me why people would want to take it. I also skipped over Consecration and Flame. This makes it so your Consecration lasts longer and its damage is increased by 20%. This is over 0.5% of damage increase, but not by much. It's certainly less than 1. The fact that it makes your Consecration last longer is kind of nice for situations where you don't have to move at all. That is sort of appealing, but that's about it. It's basically just quality of life and not really that great. Strength and Adversity is really nice in AoE. It gives you a pretty big stacking parry buff. Your Avenger Shields are capable of hitting up to 5 targets per cast, which means you can get up to 10% parry. It does refresh whenever you cast a new Avenger Shield. Like if you have hit 5 targets, got yourself 10% parry, and then you throw an Avenger Shield out to some ranged mob and interrupt it in, and it only hits the 1 target, you're only going to get 2% parry until you're able to cast Avenger Shield again. It doesn't stack or roll or anything, it just snapshots the last number of targets hit by your Avenger Shield cast. That's really the only downside I see. This talent, Crusader's Resolve, I think is just categorically worse. It's up to 6% damage reduction against targets. You have to be casting Avenger Shield a lot more often. You have to hit them, so in any sort of AoE situation that's larger than 5 targets, this is categorically going to be worse. It does affect their spell damage. That's about the only thing that I see that's positive, but I'd rather have the parry chance. Uther's Counsel is cooldown reduction on a handful of okay, but a little sort of more situational defensive cooldowns, and so I think it's pretty much a wasted point. Faith in the Light is block chance after you cast Word of Glory. I feel like this is kind of a wasted point as well. Now we're going to fix in on what I think is like maybe the 3 most important points in either tree, and they're all right next to each other. Guardian of Ancient Kings, which is your main shield wall damage reduction cooldown. Bastion of Light, which is a new, or technically not new, but newly good and useful talent that lets you basically, you just pop it. I'll even show off. Here we go, tanking dummy. Nope, don't want to attack that and get locked in combat forever. Here we go, regular training dummy. All right, Bastion of Light, we'll click it, and now I can just Shield of the Righteous, Shield of the Righteous, and Shield of the Righteous. Boom, no holy power required. This is great for having defensive, whatever, active mitigation up at the start of pulls. It's great for balancing out the fact that holy power generation is down. This is a wonderful talent, and I'm really happy to see it be good. See it be usable now. And Crusader's Judgment, which is kind of the talent that I think ties the whole class together, at least the whole rotation together. This makes it so that Judgment is way more usable. It makes it reset when you get Grand Crusader, which makes Inspiring Vanguard quite a bit more valuable. It makes it so that you have the 2 rolling charges, so you're going to basically always want to keep both charges of Judgment on cooldown, because the moment, I'll just demonstrate here, the moment that you get a Grand Crusader reset, if that ever happens, it's not going to happen for me. One of these days, I'm sure. There we go. See, now I've just gotten a full Judgment back. And because I had both of them on cooldown, instead of wasting some of the cooldown, I was able to immediately double tap it and cast it twice in a row. Now in the next tier, you have Soaring Shield and Focused Enmity. This is a really important choice node that I cannot stress enough, probably more than anything else in the entire tree. This is one you really want to pay attention in. Soaring Shield makes Avenger Shield 40 or I guess 66% stronger in AoE. It makes it hit 2 extra targets. Way stronger in any sort of AoE. So great in Mythic Plus, great in any sort of AoE fights in Raid, and it is the default of these 2. Focused Enmity makes it so that Avenger Shield does double damage, but only strikes 1 target. So this is only ever worth using in pure single target. But in pure single target, this is a must-have. That's it. Just make sure that you remember and pay attention to that. It might even behoove you to literally have a second raid build that is just this, except with Focused Enmity instead. Yeah. Gift of the Golden Valkyr synergizes really nicely with Soaring Shield and has really negative synergy with Focused Enmity, and it just makes it so that Avenger Shield reduces the cooldown of Guardian of Ancient Kings, your main shield wall talent, by 1 second for every target that it hits. It also gives you a little reactive, low health shield wall cooldown on a relatively short cooldown. I mean, 45 seconds is pretty good. This is good in AoE. It's not great. I'm obviously not taking it for Raid, and I actually don't think I would go out of my way to get it for Mythic Plus either. Eye of Tyr is back from Legion. It was the Legion artifact weapon ability. It's a pretty minor AoE damage pulse that also gives you 25% damage reduction. It's pretty nice. It's sort of a mid-level defensive cooldown, but it's AoE, it's on a relatively short cooldown. It's pretty good. Righteous Protector is absolutely amazing. It's like one of the best talents in this tree. It's very comparable to Warrior's Anger Management, for example. It just makes it so that when you Shield of the Righteous, you get Avenger's Shield. No. When you Shield of the Righteous, you get Avenging Wrath and Guardian of Ancient Kings cooldown reduction. And lastly, I've taken Divine Toll for Raid here. I love Divine Toll. It's one of my favorite abilities. I loved Kiri and Pally. I played Kiri and Pally mostly for the expansion. I specifically didn't raid that much on it. I mostly just focused on Mythic Plus. And Divine Toll's great. And as you can see, it still works just like Divine Toll used to. Oh, nope, it bugged out. So as you can see, this talented Divine Toll says it casts Avenger Shield on up to 5 targets within 30 yards, generates 1 holy power per target hit. Now, sometimes it'll bug out and it won't generate any holy power. I haven't figured out exactly what causes that yet, but it's Pretty annoying. The Covenant ability version of Divine Toll doesn't have this final line, it just doesn't generate holy power. It casts Avenger Shields, and Avenger Shields no longer generate holy power. Pretty lame. You can take Bulwark of Righteous Fury, which is a legendary. It's exactly identical to the Shadowlands legendary, but in my case, I would rather just wear that in AoE situations, and it's pretty bad in single target, so not going to use it. You can take Final Stand. Final Stand turns Divine Shield from being, you're immune to damage into you're immune to damage and taunting all the time, which is a pretty great cooldown. Faith's Armor is a terrible talent. This would be horrible at any spot in the tree, and it's really bad down here. Farron Marcus's Fervor is fine. This is 20% more damage on the primary target of Avenger's Shield for 2 points. It's like a very watered down version of Focused Enmity, but without the downside. Moment of Glory is a relatively short duration and short cooldown defensive cooldown that makes you absorb 20% of all damage you deal. It gives you an absorbed shield for 20% of all damage you deal. It's really not very good. I'm not a huge fan. It does buff the damage of Avenger's Shield, but it's not like it makes it generate holy power while it's up, so the fact that it reduces its, as it says, cooldown isn't really very useful. It's still a filler skill, it's still not a great cooldown, and, whatever. And finally, getting Divine Toll over here with Divine Resonance to cast Avenger Shields periodically is okay as like a, it'll proc all of the other traits, talents, whatever, Tears Enforcer, Bulwark of Order, Soaring Shield, all of that. It'll proc all of those, so it's free damage. I'm not going to go out of my way to get it now. I think that Eye of Tyr and Soaring Shield are definitely better in any situation where it would be useful. And Quicken Invocations, 15 seconds off of its cooldown, is probably the better of the two, but that's more of a Dragonflight type of deal. Okay, that's definitely enough rambling about the raid build. Now let's take a look at the Kyrian Mythic Plus build. This is going to be very similar to the non-Kyrian build, but with one key difference, which is Divine Toll. Obviously, if you are Kyrian in raid, by the way, you should not bother with taking Divine Toll. You should probably take Final Stand in that case, or Farron Marcus's Fervor. Okay, now as we can see over here in the left tree, there are some key differences. For one, I'm taking Cleanse Toxins and Blinding Light because I want that AoE CC value, and I do want to be able to dispel poison and disease target, effects from my party members. I'm also not bothering with Recompense because the ability to sacrifice party members and get like a big nuke of damage is actually still pretty nice. I just don't think it's really gonna happen that much in Mythic Plus. Certainly not as consistently as it would in raids where I can throw it on the other tank during any taunt swaps and then just get that sort of free damage value out of it. I don't really think that's gonna happen that much in Mythic Plus. So I'm not gonna waste a whole talent on it, but I could. Holy Aegis, you can see I only have 1 point in that here, and that is because I wanted to get Cleanse Toxins, and that was the cost I had to pay to get it. Other than that, most of the talents are the same. Unbreakable Spirit's amazing. Divine Purpose, amazing. Seal of Might and Seal of Alacrity and Sanctified Wrath, all amazing. Seraphim, good option for parsing in raids, terrible option for Mythic Plus. I would never run it. It costs as much as the Shield of the Righteous. You would definitely rather have more holy power generation in Mythic Plus, so yeah, just gonna run with Sanctified Wrath. The top of the tree stays the same in Mythic Plus. You'll note that I have not come over to Consecrated Ground and Sanctuary. You can if you find yourself struggling defensively, but instead I went with Consecration and Flame and Strength and Adversity over here on the right side to get that extra parry chance. You're pretty consistently getting 10% parry. That's usually going to add up to a lot more damage reduction than 5%, overall damage reduction. And then this, the slow, it can be nice, but yeah, I'd rather have this. Gives you some nice pathing. I actually grew to really like the Hand of the Protector playstyle in Mythic Plus, but right now the cost of getting it means that you have to give up Strength and Adversity and Consecration and Flame to go down this little path here, and I just don't really want to do that. I'd rather have the flat parry chance and the slight bit of consistency on Consecration uptime through these two rather than go through here. Strength of Conviction, again, the same justification as using it in raid. It gives you about 20% more healing overall, which is nice. Then also about 20% more damage on your Shield of the Righteous, which is going to be like 3 or 4% more damage overall in AoE is pretty good. I think that's worth taking. Again, Bulwark of Order, awesome, definitely want to have it. Here's Enforcer, giving you 10% more damage in AoE is a great 2-point cost option. Again, you're taking Bastion of Light, you're taking Soaring Shield. The one thing that I am doing differently here is, if I'm Kyrian, I think I would rather take Bulwark of Righteous Fury than most of the other talents that are down here. Certainly you don't want to take Divine Toll, it's not going to do anything. But the other option that I've seen some people recommend is taking a point in Farron Marcus's Fervor. And yeah, 10% more Avenger Shield damage, that's okay, but if I take Bulwark of Righteous Fury, I can run Bind of the Mad Paragon, or, run it in whatever other gear slots it can be equipped in. That's 5 extra seconds onto Avenging Wrath, 30% more Hammer of Wrath damage at all times. Like, that's great. I love having that. You could drop this and run Final Stand as well if you want a more defensive, tanky sort of setup. Other than that, most of the key pieces are all the same. Eye of Tyr, Righteous Protector, Crusader's Judgment, Avenging Wrath, Might. These are all the same. I really do wish Sentinel worked with Righteous Protector. I probably would be recommending that for Mythic Plus if it did, but that 2-minute cooldown is just too big of a liability. And now we're going to look at the non-Kyrian Mythic Plus build, which is going to be real simple. The only thing that changes is you drop Bulwark of Righteous Fury, you wear it as a legendary, and you pick up Divine Toll, because being able to Divine Toll and get an immediate full stack, 5 stack of Bulwark of Righteous Fury is pretty amazing. You also, let's see if I can get it to proc Holy Power for each of them this time. Nope, better luck next time. Oh well. Alrighty, let's go back to it, and I think it's rotation section up next. Alright, onto the rotation. The basics of Protection Paladin play have not changed. You use Holy Power generators, you spend the Holy Power on Shield of the Righteous, you heal yourself whenever you need healing. The specifics of how you do that have changed quite a bit. You have a couple of new offensive cooldowns in the form of Eye of Tyr and Bastion of Light, and you generally want to use these as much as you can. Avenging Wrath isn't new, but the way that you build it up in your talents is, and you want to maximize your casts of it as well, and you can have relatively high uptime on it, which is pretty awesome. In terms of the core components of the rotation, you're always going to be spec'd into Crusader's Judgment unless you're still leveling. It's absolutely criminal not to get this talent once you're, whatever the level is required to get it, 30 or whatever. Because of that, you always want to keep both charges of Judgment on cooldown, so that if you get a Grand Crusader proc, you aren't getting half of a Judgment cooldown back. With that reset, you are getting a full Judgment cooldown back. You always want to maximize the value of those Grand Crusader procs, and keeping Judgment all the way on cooldown is the way you do that. You also always want to be standing in Consecration while taking. The cooldown is incredibly short and the duration is really long, so maintaining it is very easy. You should try not to overuse it. You definitely don't need to hit Consecration on cooldown, you just don't want to ever let it drop. If you have to move, wait until you've gotten where you're going, then refresh it, and if it is a long move while you're tanking dangerous enemies, maybe you're moving with Sire Denathrius or something, you should try to cover that movement phase with a defensive cooldown like Ardent Defender or Guardian of Ancient Kings, or even Divine Shield if you're spec'd into Final Stand. Avenger's Shield is still a higher priority skill than Blessed Hammer most of the time, but it is generally weaker than Hammer of Wrath, unless you're in an all-out AoE situation and maximizing that AoE damage is worth the loss of priority damage. As for stats, item level is king. Strength increases are mostly a function of item level, and strength is your strongest stat, so whenever in doubt, go for higher item level. When you're comparing pieces that are around the same item level, haste is the best secondary stat, mastery is pretty good too, and versatility and crit are both fine. Basically, you always prioritize item level, then haste, then whatever. On to legendaries, as I mentioned in the talent section, I think that Mad Paragon is the best legendary all around, since you can get Bulwark of Righteous Fury as a talent, and it's pretty easy to pick up. You're sacrificing potentially 10% more Avenger Shield damage on the primary target for like 150% more Shield of the Righteous damage in AoE. That's a pretty good trade. Mad Paragon is a good DPS increase in any sort of single target content, and it's not bad in AoE either. It basically makes your wings last about 5 seconds longer, which is pretty good. There is potentially a different approach here though. Bulwark of Righteous Fury is still a great bonus in AoE. So if you want to spec in a Divine Toll and then play a different Covenant in Mythic Plus other than Kyrian, that is an option. It's a little more complicated than just simply playing Kyrian, but the ability to have Divine Toll and Ashen Hallow, for example, at the same time is very appealing. You'll be able to deal hilarious amounts of damage in Mythic Plus, but you will have to deal with extra keybinds. And finally, on the subject of Covenants, the best Covenant for Paladin is Venthyr in raids. You can stick with the normal Kyrian setup in Mythic Plus, or you can go Venthyr full time and take Divine Toll as a talent, and then run Bulwark of Righteous Fury as a legendary. It's a pretty powerful setup if you're able to manage the extra keybinds required to make it work. Kyrian's Divine Toll actually kind of sucks due to not generating holy power, whereas the talent does. Most of the time. I've had it bug out a couple of times. When it works right, it's great. The Mechanicos tree is still pretty nice. It slightly makes up for Kyrian's Divine Toll being weaker if you're Kyrian, but it's not quite as good as just being able to have Ashen Hallow and Divine Toll. You can play Necrolord if you have that leveled up. I actually think it's pretty solid defensively, definitely tankier than Venthyr, but it loses a lot of damage and you don't need to be Necrolord to maintain Shield of the Righteous. Night Fae is only good if you want to help other players parse. You put Blessing of Summer on them and then they do a bunch more damage. I would never do that, but you can if you really want to be like a cool friend. Well, I think that's about it. I really came into patch 10.0 with zero expectations for Paladins, and I think that I've come out of the patch very pleasantly surprised. It's still a really good tank. It still has a lot of group utility, it has good burst damage, and now it has a very versatile, customizable defensive toolkit that kind of isn't like anything you can get anywhere else. I still really like Paladin a lot. Let me know if you have any questions, like and subscribe and all that stuff, and thank you for watching. Bye.